tuned in to The Andrew Lawton Show.
Barbara Kay is a phenomenal columnist at the National Post and the Epoch Times and has been one of my favorite guests on this show over time, and she joins us again. Barbara, always good to talk to you. Let's just get this right out of the way here. The pretense that this is anti-Zionism and not anti-Semitism is long gone, is it not?
I would think so. I would think that October 7th kind of stripped that veil and shredded it. There is no difference when people are screaming Free Palestine and they're carrying that flag, which is not the flag, by the way, of a state. It's the flag of an intention, and the intention is to eradicate Israel. So, yeah, we're talking anti-Israel, but also anti-Semitism, really of a very hardcore kind.
And it's not even veiled. I mean, if someone wants to protest at the Israeli consulate in Toronto, I may disagree with it, but I'd say have at it, because you're at least protesting the thing that you claim to object to. If they want to protest at the Israeli embassy, when we saw Jewish-owned businesses being targeted very early on, I mean, some of the footage looked like, to be frank, a new Kristallnacht. And then you see the protesting at Mount Sinai Hospital. Now, I don't pretend to know the ins and outs of Mount Sinai's leadership, but I've never heard of this hospital having any connection to the Israeli government or Israeli politics or foreign policy. It just happens to be Jewish and have Sinai in the name. Am I missing something here?
No, you're not missing anything. I know very well the origins of the Mount Sinai Hospital, because if you go back far enough in Canadian history, you don't, because you're very young. But back in the day, there were quotas on Jews in medical school, and it was very difficult for Jewish doctors to get internships or residencies in the other hospitals. And the Jewish community said, you know what? Let's start our own hospital. Same as the Jewish General Hospital in Montreal. So they did. But obviously, these hospitals hire everybody. They're very multicultural places, of course, and they're open to the community. So everybody, their patients come from the entire community, and so it represents its legacy, and it does mean that you can get kosher meals there if that's your inclination. But aside from that, it's and rooms for circumcision, for ceremonies and that sort of thing. That's what's Jewish about it. And there's a chapel, I think. But apart from that, it's a community hospital like all the others. But these clowns, they see a name that sounds Jewish. They don't really do their homework on this. They just see it as a target because it has a Jewish name or a Jewish implication, or like Heather Reisman's store. It's owned by a Jew, delicatessens owned by a Jew. I mean, they don't care if the clientele or the staff or everybody else is nothing to do with being Jewish. So, yeah, that's...
Yeah, and I go back to, for years and years ago, we have seen the BDS movement, the boycott, divestment, sanctions movement, which is in and of itself, I think, rooted in anti-Semitism, and it would historically protest anything that had even a peripheral relationship to Israel. I mean, Aroma Coffee is a coffee shop that's Israeli-owned. They do a wonderful job. Whenever I'm in Toronto, I try to go to Aroma. It's not a political operation. It just happens to be, by virtue of geography, an Israeli company. So you've got activists that boycott that. We've now taken this BDS movement, which I think a lot of people thought was just this little corner of the university thing that didn't really affect anyone. And we've now seen the export of this to hospitals. Like I've always been a cynic about these things, but I never imagined that BDS would extend to hospitals.
Well, just to make you a little more cynical, Andrew, I can tell you that it's very common practice for even Hamas leaders. Just recently, for example, I think it was Ismail Haniyeh. He's the head political honcho for Hamas, who lives in Qatar. His daughter or his sister or somebody in his family was just in Hadassah Hospital in Israel for a life-saving operation. Very common for the big, cheeses in the most anti-Semitic movements. When they want expert medical care, they send them to Israeli hospitals, and where they are, by the way, treated with exactly the same professionalism and concern and care and compassion as anybody else. Even terrorists, by the way, who end up in Israeli hospitals are very well treated. Palestinians routinely, they can't get, if they're child has a heart condition, for example, that's too sophisticated for the hospitals in the West Bank, they bring them, they're treated, they go home. In some cases, they have treated people who have been very grateful at the time and then came back to try to blow up a pizza parlor, So it's a sort of strange world we inhabit when we get into the lower reaches of cynicism promoting facts of this world.
Yeah, well, and that's always been, I mean, the most glaring hypocrisy from dictators, Islamists and otherwise, is that they're all about death to the West. But where do they send their kids to go to school? I mean, Kim Jong-un, I think he, North Korea, if I recall, he was educated in either in Europe or somewhere like that. You have Iranian dictators and mullahs; they send their family members to Switzerland, the United States, France for medical treatment. And you're right. I mean, and you mentioned that he lives in Qatar. For people that don't realize this, even they don't want to live in this Gaza that they say is such a wonderful, wonderful place were it not for the evil Zionist Jews that are wreaking havoc on it when they haven't even been there for 15 years now. So where do you think this is going? Because I saw this display at the hospital, wasn't all that surprised by it now, but I did note that conspicuous silence from people that if those who are critical of vaccines were protesting a hospital would have wanted to send in the police and now are silent.
Well, I'm glad you showed that clip of what Justin Trudeau said some years ago, and he was lending his moral authority to an idea and to what he thinks is the moral, let's have some moral clarity here. It is not acceptable. This is not acceptable. This is not who we are, blah, blah, blah. But when we have an incident like this, and we've had many similar incidents, that's his moment to get up and say, I'm distressed by this. I'm upset by this. As a Canadian, this disturbs me greatly. This is not who we are. And all the shibboleths that he says with all the other stuff. He's not in the frame here. He should be going down to the Mount Sinai Hospital and holding a press conference outside it and say, this is one of our great hospitals in this city. There is no way that anybody inside this hospital, staff, patients, anybody should feel 1 minute. I mean, the speech writes itself. All he has to do is and by the way, not say, and Islamophobia is bad too. Like not tack.
Oh, that even if he does the first thing, he's going to.
I know he's going to tack it on. But if he could just for once forbear to tack on that little, and we're equally, upset about Islamophobia because there are no Muslim schools or mosques or at the moment that are being targeted for hatred by anybody, let alone Jews. And that's where you get the message trickling down. And all he has to say is, if he, just what you said, if you have a problem, you have free speech here and you have the right to your opinion. If you have a problem with what's going on in the Middle East and you think it's Israel's fault, go to the Israeli embassy and protest there. Do not why am I writing the speech for him? He's not going to pay me, but wouldn't somebody in the PMO think that up and say, hey, come on, let's write a sort of a nifty little, perky speech and take, fly into Toronto for the day and make a day of it. Like put on some other speeches elsewhere. He could stop this. I mean, let's put it this way. He might not be able to stop all of it, but he could certainly muffle the cheering squad who might be just a little embarrassed after their prime minister has told them this is not who we are as Canadians, to say, I think I'll skip this demonstration. So he could certainly bring the temperature down on this, and he hasn't. Yeah,
and at the very least, I think the moral clarity would be incredibly important. Barbara Kay, always enjoy your work in the National Post, the Epoch Times, and wherever else you pop up. Thank you so much for coming on today.
Thanks, Andrew.
Thanks for listening to The Andrew Lawton Show. Support the program by donating to True North at www.tnc.news.